So April Thomas serves as the Director of Historic Foodways for Northern York County Historical and Preservation Society and Historic Dill Tavern. April has over 20 years of experience in living history and historic costume design. She also has been featured in an episode of A Taste of History with Chef Walter Staib. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to April.
Morning, everyone. Excuse me. That's my little timer here so that I make sure I only talk about the 2 minutes. Trust me, I can go longer. Thank you for coming on this nice spring rainy morning. I'm going to be speaking to you specifically about a recent project I was involved in that ties into both food and clothing history, because as I always explain to people, these things are essentially completely entwined, as our people like involve these two main pieces. In all things social history, you find if you study one, you invariably end up becoming an expert on other aspects of daily life. To start out, the title of the book, which I was really honored to be asked to contribute a small amount to, was called the Tavern. It's called the Tavern Cook. It's available wherever books are sold. I have a slide showing you, but it's this beautiful. And the telling, the life story and the background of Richard Briggs, who was a very famous cook in the 18th century in London. He was published in the late 18th century, one of the second largest cookbook in American history, basically English and American culinary history. The only other cookbook that was published that was similar to this was Hannah Glass's The Art of Cooking in 1747, which was widely sold and distributed in America. It's really popular. One of the first, all around that anybody could purchase and go from home. So the significance of Richard Briggs' cookbook, I have a slide showing you. The 18th century cookbooks, as you know, have a rather large title. They're very descriptive. They're not usually just, this is my book. It'll say a book about this and go on for several. It's really quite whimsical and fun. It's one of the reasons I think a lot of us like bake. But this particular book is written by Marc Meltonville, and it's an abridged version of the original cookbook. The original cookbook is several hundred pages. It is huge, very comprehensive, very lovely, still available for today. This book tells the backstory of who Richard was and about all of the background. And the cookbook itself is very geared to people like us, and people that want to create history, want to cook in the 18th century, maybe don't have the experience of cooking over a hearth. This cookbook is much more condensed to be a very useful modern version of what Briggs originally wrote. So let's get going. I'll tell you a little bit more about my history and my involvement as we. So this is the modern book that Marc Meltonville just published, the Tavern Cook. So to give you back on Marc is an incredibly knowledgeable and kind person, especially after you need to be involved in all. Marc is a specialist primarily on Tudor and Georgian era cookery. He has been published multiple times, really lovely historical books as well as just practical books. He's also has a lot of successful children's books. This is Marc's website right down here. And this is Marc himself. So if any of you are into watching BBC programs or anything, any Anglophiles in the room, stuff. Top left of the screen, or your top right, you guys, is anyone know what building that is? Take a little guess. It's not here in the United States, I'll give you that. Hampton Court. Famously home of Henry VIII, the Tudor monastery, Tudor dynasty that we all know of. It was originally built not for Henry VIII, not for the Tudor court, but by one that basically Henry decided getting them the right kind of blocks. It's really nice property. Turned it into one of the only surviving Tudor palaces left in England. Mark was director of food program there in one of the extensions for many, many years. And also several other historic and various royal sites throughout England. This is a picture of Mark from about a decade ago where he was instrumental in redoing the kitchens at Kew Palace. Those of you that love the story of our revolution where George III famously started to go mad, his family decided and Parliament decided to basically put George III in a smaller historic palace and basically hide him from the public while they rehabbed him. The kitchens in Kew Palace were essentially mothballed in the late 18th century after George III was back on the mend, went back to royal court life. The kitchens were just closed up and eventually Victorian additions were added, but this kitchen was large, extensive set of kitchens within the building were basically just closed up and left. And Mark and several other historians, living historians and archaeologists, which they wear many hats, basically revived those kitchens about a decade ago. And you can find a lot of information about that online. It's really incredible what they did. They went back in, everything was still there. Just needed to be cleaned up, tuned up, massive roasting spits, huge section. I can't even speak. It makes a historian like myself giddy just thinking that we got to cook and revived kitchens that haven't been used for 200 years with all the intact technology. So Mark is a very knowledgeable man, a very kind teacher. And, he also did a beautiful spread for Stonehenge when they did a television. So his knowledge is very wide and very hands-on as well. That's why he's going to be successful. So his goal in writing this book was to make more of the history for living historians and just history enthusiasts more available. So where do I fit in all this? Well, many of you that know me well, and a few of you here do. I get on with everybody. I talk. I really love people, and I love teaching. I think the reason I really got into making historic reproduction clothing and food down the years is not only did I grow up next door to a museum that allowed me to play around with that, the Living History Farm Museum in Eastern Pennsylvania. My mother did not like sports, organized sports, or anything. She really liked history. And so she took me to many sites down the years, like which grew up fireside, as opposed to soccer child, I'm not sure. My dad did like football, but I never moved to it. So I've been more comfortable around old souls, old buildings, old clothing my whole life. About 5 or 6 years ago, I went to a really large symposium down in Williamsburg, Antiques Forum every year. It's an incredible, highly recommended, wonderful, very historical symposium. And I walked up to Mark, and the other keynote speaker here, who is Jeremy. Jeremy is expert in all things architecture in the 18th century, such as Capability Brown and Robert Adam, which nobody hired. So basically, I just walked right up to 2 keynote speakers and said, "Hi, I'm April." And blah, blah, blah. And I just started ranting. I don't really remember exactly what I said. Basically, next thing Mark said, "Well, what are you doing for lunch?" Nothing. Nothing else. What's lunch for 2 of them? And I think I was actually I was on such a high, I couldn't believe I was saying that. They're really both very sweet, approachable, both have daughters, so I'm sure they knew exactly what to do with me. But anyway, not long after that, we all corresponded for quite some time after leaving the conference. And Mark wanted to hear all about all the fun things I've done down the years, because there aren't that many people that really do what we do. Living history is a sort of, and living history encompasses cooking in person, cooking over the hearth, recreating clothing, all the things that involve daily, everyday life that we physically reproduce for the public, for all of those that history enthusiasts that love it. And that's how we teach. So often people in our roles have varied backgrounds. Some of us are archaeologists, some of us, I'm technically I work as a full-time sort of costume designer, but I have a fashion design and costume history degree with retail. Mark specialized in pottery. And I don't think you compare exactly this, but everyone sort of falls into living history of different avenues. So we find each other and we just start finding we have a lot in common and a lot of the same problems and a lot of the same goals, which is making history really fun and attainable and enjoyable for people that, that want to know about it. So, having said that, there's not that many of us. Really only a handful of actual people that can cook by a hearth anymore, except in third world countries where they still do it as a norm. But the history of European Western civilization and cooking, very small group. So we like to stick together. So he asked me about my background of the months and sort of what I do, and this is my bread and butter. I created a business called Fashion Revisited, where I have a pattern line and I reproduce clothing, specifically 18th and early 19th century. And so again, because I grew up in the environment, I grew up around it, and it naturally occurred to me that I loved fashion, but I didn't like modern fashion. So I went through modern fashion blend program, took lots of extra courses, kind of tailored my degree to work. All of my professors thought I was mad, absolutely crazy. Why didn't you want to work in the industry? Oh, it's no time for modern fashion, really. And I think they all thought I was absolutely nuts, but I have a very supportive spouse who lets me earn money here and there where I can, and some years it's been along the ground. But I've been very lucky to work with a lot of productions and museums down here. Some of them very humbling, and but really my heart is in cooking. I love clothing, I love reproducing it, but my heart is really in cooking. So when I started telling Mark about my background, I said, well, I've been involved this one site for about 10 years, and it's this beautiful old historic tavern. It's right on my home. Like, I didn't look for it. It was right on my, back doorstep, essentially. And for many years, I filled multiple roles of, director, and things that sound so glorious, but as we all know, we all muck in at historic sites. There's not a lot of money, but a lot of glory and a lot of fun to be had. And I spent years there working with lovely people, trying to figure out, looking at the history of what we have survived, what kind of food people, especially in this area, really ate, especially travelers. What is the food culture of rural central Pennsylvania? And I wouldn't think that would be that interesting to somebody like Mark, but it is, because for one thing, he has said to me a couple of times, which I love, I'm an Anglophile, I love the Brits. We think of a lot of them as like drinking tea and their fingers up. It's not the whole story. Same with America. I think people in other countries have an idea of what we are, and they think of the Wild West and all of the things that Americans are known for, such as being rebellious. And indeed, we are a pioneering nation. Our food culture shows that pretty clearly too. So I started telling you about different programs I've done and really researching what the tavern would have been like to eat at, what really is a tavern. And then sparked a conversation. I said, well, I'm looking at the book, and I really love you and a couple of our other colleagues in Williamsburg and different historic sites to contribute a little, maybe do some testing of recipes. And of course, I'm sort of in my head infinity at this point, thinking, even if you just asked me to like read it, I'd be excited. So after that, it was lots of back and forth, lots of conversations on the years, emails, lots of really enjoyable conversations. Along the way in there too, we finished filming at Historic Dills. We had the pleasure of having Walter Staib. We got in touch with him many years ago and asked him if he would like to come to really tried begging him to come to our site and do an episode. And I don't know if any of you, most of you here are wagging your head like, Taste of History. It's a wonderful series. You can stream most of it for free right now on the streaming platforms. But it's season 11, episode 1, if you haven't already seen it. And I think I'm very, very proud of what everyone was able to produce. I'm really happy we got to work with Walter, who's another incredible old soul of just knowledge and kindness. He really let us just show off what we could do. And he said, what have you guys for our documentation? I said, we have even you guys on the archive, in your archives here, you have the original Eichelberger ledgers, which is what Dill's Tavern eventually became the Eichelberger property. And we see what they bought, how much whiskey they produced, how many people came in and out of the tavern in a given year, how much money they made or didn't make. It's all there. So I went through some of that with some of our other members. This was about 5 years ago. We came up with a menu of what I thought would make the most sense for what people in this area would eat. For the Lowhead Dams, we had a lot of fish, shad, and things like that. And we created this beautiful menu and put that with Walter. So that was really fun. gave me a very deep dive into local food history and what really was genuinely eaten in this area. And what wasn't, as you can see it come through as far as the letters. There's two ways to figure out very quickly what certain area or a family or a person has in their life in this period. They document a lot of things we don't document anymore. We document other things. Other things are that's what they would document what they spent the money on. And that mostly includes food and clothing. So you see whether they have lemons or not by it's just a couple of fun shots. We had far too much fun. First, we slept for 2 weeks after. Sort of things that I my team had produced over the years at Dill. We had top picture there is the boar's head feast, which Barry here has to take credit for. My dear husband, who is you see the nursing expertise in the stitching. So when you do the proper boar's head feast, these traditional recipes involve taking a pig's head and you sort of parboil it, you strip the skin off of it, remove it, the skin from the actual bone, and then you take pork and other things and you restuff it, stitch it back together, and then you cut it almost like a pate. Really good though. A lot of people were scared to try it, but I'm happy with those that did. It's really quite tasty. But we jokingly called him Frankenstein. So he is a bit different. And then we have, of course, bake ovens there, and we were able to produce down the years all sorts of programs involving baking and cooking and preserving. This little adorable guy here on the other side is a marzipan hedgehog, which was a sort of viral food fad in the 18th century. We love marzipan. Marzipan is basically almond paste, and almond paste can be shaped into all sorts of things. Very common candy still like today. In fact, I think Mozart, what's the company that's local to New York? There is still a candy company in this area that produces marzipan treats. Never tried marzipan, I encourage. They would create these little two characters studded with that paste. Flip it all. So you can imagine this is the sort of thing I get up to for fun and sort of privilege. Lots of interesting. So basically, Marc knew I was game to test all sorts of recipes, and Briggs's cookbook, the original 18th century cookbook, is, like I said, very huge. There is a chapter for everything. Basically, several of us were assigned different chapters to basically cook and read through and decide what we felt was virtuous, valuable, non-approachable, that sort of thing. I was given the ragu chapter, which I really love ragus. Ragu is basically an 18th century French term for cassoulet, which one we're familiar with. Same thing, casserole. It's a posh casserole. Basically, lots of things all put together and hope for the best. How one food historian talks about it. But the other part of the cookbook that was beside the cooking was really about Richard Briggs himself. And I apologize, there's me a couple slides in here where it says George Briggs. That's because my laptop just kept putting in George. I had to fight it, go back and try to remove it, and it wouldn't let me. So it is Richard Briggs. This is really the other part of the book. Is first half is a tale of what being a tavern keeper, what a tavern was like, you know, sort of life that that Richard lived, and whether or not it was, you know, explaining the differences to today. And really, there's not much difference to today. Life is very relevant. So this is not specifically Richard Briggs because we don't have any surviving images of him. I'll have a little slide later to really explain more. This is really what an 18th century tavern cook would look like. We have an idea of like a jolly big fella. Maybe eventually many, but in many cases, when you hear descriptions of cooks in the century, depending on what household and where they're cooking, they're often described as very tired and worn out. And it's basically because the role of the tavern keeper and the tavern cook is extremely multitasking. So they're often shown wearing blue when they are painted or drawn. Blue is the color of servants, and even though you might not have been indentured to any one particular person or any one particular household, blue is almost always worn by those who are serving so that people understand around them. Like this is the livery of the late 18th century green, as opposed to green, which is what green in a lot of livery of people that are under service. So what did a tavern really look like? Well, a tavern was a place of rest, refreshment, and business. There's there's all these words that you can interchange in each century for these sorts of establishments. There's taverns, there's inns, there's what we now know the word pub very, very commonly, right? If you go to England, you're going to most likely be your options for eating out are either a restaurant or basically the tavern fits into these are all very specific designations in each section. Tavern is more of an eating establishment than say an inn, which also feeds you but has rooms and also rooms for private services such as weddings, burials, just meeting. Taverns were often frequented by widows, which is what gets really interesting. This is an image of we found this before, so thank you, Barry. It's a French tavern. Some really fun things in this picture, and I'm just going to point them out because it just shows like taverns, inns, all these different places, ale houses. They're all where real life happens. A lot of these were established in that period to solve the same sorts of problems we have today. For example, in the 18th century, there was a gin craze. Now, if you watch the movie or the story Annie, which is the 1930s, the bathtub gin, that is not new. In the 18th century, they were masters at it. A combination of licensing laws, and moral laws, and all sorts of things happening. People were able to produce gin pretty reasonably and easily in their own homes without license, and it became a problem. Hogarth has lots of images and Method you've seen, like if you ever seen the Gin Alley image, where basically Hogarth drew what was one section of London where it's supposed to infer that everybody's drunk, which is children falling on women's arms and people stretched like dead on surfaces. It's a real problem in London and other places in Europe in the 18th and early 19th century. Gin was really toxic to make at home, but people did it and it was cheap. And so to stop people from drinking so much bathtub gin, essentially they created they needed that third place. They talk about today, like children's people today are having a hard time. There's a third place for them to go. Third place means simply a place to rest and visit, hang out, that sort of thing. So taverns, inns, ale houses, these are all third places. So they can keep an eye, regulate you a bit more with your alcohol. But even though there's drinking in these establishments, see the child who's in a primitive sort of walker. Everywhere. It's probably the cook's child. People always say to me when I'm cooking, well, what if you have small children, how to keep them out of the fire? They'll only get them burned once. They won't go in again, probably. And you have all sorts of modern things to keep them safe. They have contraptions just like we do today, playpens of sorts. You see chickens roaming around, there's a dog drinking under. Now, this is not to say that they're all raucous and dirty and filthy, but this is a revolutionary image. This is when things are being hatched in the French Revolution. But you can really see the point is that there's life going on in these buildings. And a tavern has that, say, in the kitchen, but not in the common rooms. The tavern is much more elegant. So I'm going to start by addressing a couple of things, which I like to try to break the barriers down on. I'm not sure if this image is kind of dark, but so why do we think that tavern keepers' wives or tavern women specifically? So when you hear the word, like you hear the combination word tavern wench, right? How many here have heard of like tavern wench? Anyone? There we go. Okay. So everyone thinks you hear the term tavern wench, you go into a tavern, oh, beer, slugging, chest, that sort of thing. Well, this is really just due to the fact that the 20th century has really destroyed the proper image of what a tavern not only is, but what a tavern keeper and his wife family would really be. So we can thank Pirates of the Caribbean. But I mean, I like a good pirate show, pirate movie. And even within those beautiful 20th century Disney movies, he still gets a lot right, especially the early ones. But this is more what they look like. This is they're not me, yes. I just finished a full day of cooking. I'm, no makeup, no anything, just tired and sweaty and wearing a basic hat and basic clothing. And tavern keepers' wives, or tavern keepers indeed, if they're women, there are many of them. They're dealing with a multitude of jobs. This is really more or less the image of what tavern keepers look like. This was the great shot taken few years ago by a friend of mine. Barry had just asked me if I checked something on the stove, and I gave him some sort of snarky answer, because I do that. And then my friend caught me looking back there like I told him. Because this is really the image of what a tavern keeper and his wife or family would really look like. We're wearing our working clothes, we're hard at it, right over the fire. Diners are all eating in other rooms, most of them private. And the other image is also of a woman who was painted in her role. Now she's an upscale tavern keeper. She's clearly dealing with gentry, educated men in the city, probably of London. She has a tea tray there, and that is, she's wearing silk. She's probably got an apron on as well. But this is more or less the image of what high-end tavern would be like. And they're almost always run by, just like today, if you go to a pub, you often see a married couple. She would take on a lease. In the 18th century, most buildings are leased in both England and America. They're not often outright owned by the people, but the people that run businesses in them or even dwell in them. It's not very common. Just like there's no bank accounts for the average person. Everything's worn on your person that you have wealth, things that you can easily get wealth for. Your watch and your jewelry and clothing for that matter, they all hold a lot more value than today's items. Although if you go and buy a Louis Vuitton handbag now, you can read it's the same sort of thing. In the 18th century, you're not spending thousands of dollars to get your clothing, but no matter what you spend on your clothing, you will be able to easily go in and pawn that clothing for good money. Cash on the nails, let's say. Put your clothes down, you put your item down, and someone in the city in the right circumstances will give you money for that, and that is your bank. That is how you get money. That's why there's so many pawnbrokers and stories of Dickens and such. Because everyday people didn't have the ability to go to banks. Someone like Richard Briggs would have been able to get a loan and likely would have had some sort of backup somewhere, but it's not common. Women who take over the lease or the freehold of the building or the business after the husband's die often really struggle to continue doing it unless they're really good with money because they can't just go get a loan. It's very, very hard for them. So again, I think maybe it should be Richard Briggs, not George. But this is the front inner page of the original cookbook that Briggs was responsible for writing. The English art of cookery. And note it does not mean new English art of cookery. So he's not presuming to tell you that he has some new and glorious way to do everything. He's actually just telling you, this is my take on English cookery. Now you see what I mean about the lengthy word. So according to the present practices, being a complete guide to all housekeepers on a plan entirely new, which is a term I love this term, consisting, it's not in the title, so he's not saying it's all new, but he's saying a plan entirely new. He's going to give you a new way of doing it. Consisting of 38 chapters, yes, 38 chapters, okay, and this isn't even all of them. Pancakes and fritters, cheesecakes, and of course we have, you know, the F's for F's and all the original spelling. Making of soup and broth. Sauces for every occasion, I do one. There's a sauce for everything. And in the 18th century, everything has sauce on it. Bills of fare for every month of the year, neatly and correctly engraved on 12 top plates by Richard Briggs. Many years cooked at the Globe Tavern, Fleet Street, and also with that, I'll show you another slide of this. But he spends most of his years at two specific tavern buildings, and both of them have quite a good reputation after the leaves. He's a really good. So, yes, White Hart. White Hart is still, there are several White Hart taverns, pubs, different places all over England, America, but the actual White Hart he cooked at, where he indeed finished his career, is still in existence and still operating. The original kitchens are down in the basement. Mark went and met the most recent freeholder, as they say, for there. And he showed him around, but there's none of the original equipment or anything that still survives. But it's a basement kitchen, like most 18th century buildings. There's in the city, most kitchens are in the basement, and indeed most houses in the 18th century style in London and that sort of part of the world, and even in Philadelphia and here in York. I mean, all of these beautiful row homes, they might be very large and very spacious, but they often have a full underground level. And it's often where the kitchens, if you haven't got space for the kitchen outside, that's where it goes. Kitchens outside are more common, where you have space and room and air. So we'll talk more about that later, because the problem with an indoor basement kitchen is exposure. Well, his tavern, the White Hart, is where he is, I believe, when he runs this. And it's a gathering place for dangerous intellectuals, which means he's getting a lot of attention from the right kind of people at the time, people with money, power, and influence. So the English Art of Cookery, I should know this by heart, but now I think it's 87. Yeah, 1788 is the year that this cookbook is published. Now, it's not likely he published it himself. It's huge. He would have had to have a lot of money. He was approached by a publisher, and they knew they could make a lot of money off of it. It's ginormous. The English is not particularly good. The French is worse. Marc would know because Marc is French national. So this gentleman cook, as he describes himself in the publications of his time, the advertisements, he describes himself as a gentleman cook. He's got aspirations for greater. He's good. He's clearly good. He's clearly knowledgeable. He can read and write, but he can't read and write that well. And whoever edited the book didn't do a lot of corrections because they weren't probably like French or cooking. It's an incredibly huge cookbook. It's wonderful. It's published in England. It's very successful. And then it's published here a couple years later in America. And it's still available today. And it's still one of the only original 18th century cookbooks. So was he political or educated? We know he was somewhat educated. Probably had political opinions, but having so many people in the tavern come and pay for rooms and have political meetings and have dinners, he probably didn't express his opinions to anybody other than the organizers. Just like today, politics is fraught. This is the White Hart. This is how it looks today. Still quite pretty. Had a couple facelifts in the outside, but the original building. Marc was here to tell you offhand exactly. It's several hundred years older than in the 18th century. I believe it's the first part of the building like 14. Very normal in London for buildings to be this old, and they just sort of keep adding, changing, because of licensing laws. They never really tear them down. They just keep going. And so they're history and amazing. Marc's hoping to do a book launch later this year, and for which I will give my IT to. So this is a quote from someone who attended a dinner at the establishment at the White Hart in the 1780s. We don't know the exact date, but we have the actual quote. It's a cold November in London. You take 3 large steps from your front door onto the pavement. It's cold. There will be a hard frost tomorrow. But for tonight, the air is just crisp and clean. You are excited for it. Your friend is correct, and he does indeed know Mr. Robinson, just someone who must have knowledge. Then you will have a table at one of the best dining establishments in town. Tonight, you will enjoy the traditional dishes of the city, combined with the newest cookery techniques and styles. Tonight you dine, tomorrow you dine out on the store. You look for a cab and shiver at the promise of the evening will bring very best in modern dining. After all, it is 1780. So I think what is really fun as a historian and trying to reproduce things is you recognize, sorry, we just attended the Globe, that was a couple of years right before the White Hart. Basically, Briggs makes such stuff in the Globe, you somehow get the better deal on the White Hart and moves it there. We always think we're the most advanced and the most educated and the most enlightened and the most, even if we're being humble. We think it's 2024. It's 2024. I still think I'm in 2023. Everyone's always very forward thinking. I think we like to eat out, we like to enjoy food culture. People often want the most modern, even if their lifestyle is so this is another picture of Marc again, just to show he makes such a good example. Perfect. What and why did Briggs write this? It is one of the largest, most comprehensive cookbooks of the 18th century. The only thing modern that comes close to it is one of Martha Stewart's, like her magnum opus, which I think she published in like 2003, and or you can compare it with Mrs. Beaton in the 1860s. And Mrs. Beaton wasn't even really a cook; she was just married to somebody who was a really successful publisher. They knew they could make a really good living if they made a comprehensive cookbook. Well, we don't. Marc did extensive history. Everything I know about Briggs simply because Marc told me as he went through, and he went through archive after archive in London and other places, and he had a professional research assistant he used often. We tried to find the backstory on this gentleman. You start with births, marriages, death, that sort of thing. We don't really know. We don't really know is the answer, but It's the same today. Not everyone back then could just write a cookbook. Today it's very common. In that period, it wasn't that common. He must have been special. He definitely was a good cook. He was definitely frequented by people that had money and power and influence, and including publishers. So it was worth it. But we still don't really know what the driving force was. Maybe he got some money. We don't have records of what he was paid. But we know that it helped his career. So like I said, he didn't own the building where he worked. He lived around the corner. He lived in a place called Hampton Court. Still exists today. It looks very different back then. And he owned the freehold, as they say. He owned the lease. Basically, Briggs did the cooking as far as we can tell. He would have had all sorts of assistants and things. He was married to a woman who was described as a mangler, which is a form of washer. So again, it's kind of pretentious because a gentleman in the 18th century wouldn't openly admit that he was married to a washerwoman, someone who had a business. She was running a washing business out of their home around the corner. They had to have, we found some other information or some marketed because they had to have a rather lot of insurance policy against fire because she was working with fires, that sort of thing in the household that had to be covered by insurance. So they're working people, they're hardworking people. She obviously probably helped them. And he had 2 sons. One of them we know someone in the profession, the other I don't know all actually, but one of them survived. So today, when you go to England, a pub is like a private home opened up to the public for the sale and consumption of alcoholic drink. And sometimes they have rooms, sometimes they have parties. An ale house is specifically for drinking, and you usually walk up to the ale house, like around here, you walk up to, I don't know exactly what would be some of the distilleries where you walk in and you can buy alcohol and take it away. Like our grocery stores now have buy alcohol and take it. That's what an ale. Tavern is a clubhouse with fine food, alcohol, and possibly rooms. It was a more exclusive and open subscription. So it's kind of like this is where the gentlemen's clubs go to start. Proper gentlemen's clubs, not gentlemen's clubs that we know that. Where men would basically be able to go and conduct business, have subscription, and be able to be taken care of. So the taverns represent the new restaurant lifestyle. This is really why they're very relevant today. For anybody that can afford to eat away from home. This is a modern, I believe this is the White Hart Tavern today, and actually it's really, really close to what it would look like in the 18th century. Britain is still very traditional. Britain has had a huge cultural food movement in the 21st century, but there's still really people like a roast dinner on Sundays. They love to traditionally go certain days of the week, and just like we like Saturday nights of American Saturday night. The food's really very similar to table. And it's not really much different. We like to think things change, but a couple of things don't. Human nature and really food culture just evolves. It's not really so related. In Briggs's original cookbook, he has multiple images of how you lay the table, and this is that earlier style where they bring everything out. We call it family style. And everything is brought, and usually the first and second course is put out, and everybody enjoys themselves, and then it's taken away, and then they bring like the second course, which is really just like sweet and savory. So one of Briggs' daily life was cooking, ordering supplies, catering, groups of pubs. They did their own distilling and small batch ale under their licensing, which is pretty common. Most people, including children, drank small ale with near beer. Sometimes it's called 50%. Don't drink the water. It's not for the reasons you think. Just don't drink the water. Just don't. He would have been at some point, obviously, this cookbook would have taken years. There was a long time, probably spent evenings doing it. And of course, entertaining his own family. This is an image that I took, Barry took this of one of the meals that we produced during the test process. It's one of the regular recipes. Lamb done a certain way. It's basically lamb chops, and ragus have like 10 or 20 steps. They're unbelievably, they're not hard. You get the cookbook, I encourage you to do the ragus. It's really fun. They're like really beautiful casseroles, and they're just too much. There's hard boiled egg yolks. There's seared meat of all different types. There's of course meatballs. There's of course there's citrus on it. People think you couldn't get lemons. Lemons were pretty readily available both in England and America. They're very common, starting in the 17th century. But it's still kind of a posh thing to have them. Yeah, enough money to add an extra lemon, cut into wedges. You're doing well. But this is one of the recipes. kids to go to, which you never know. Sometimes you go to 18th century recipes, and most of them, the descriptions are, take a quarter pound of this, and then this much milk to fit in this type of glass, and then, something the size of an egg, and you're halfway in, you're a little confused. But tavern keepers also had a really large amount of sort of like other roles that brought them actual income, involving smoking, like I said, small scale and sometimes large scale distilling and brewing. Briggs has got an omelet section in the book that is just huge. Omelets are really relevant. We think of them as just sort of like, oh, we're so used to eating omelets, but omelets are very, very common thing. This is a picture of actual hams we smoked over at the smokehouse that we have over at Dill's Tavern 2 Easters ago. But Briggs would have had several people working in his kitchen, young boys, dentures, different people who would be apprenticed, probably his son, for sure, at any time. It's usually a family affair having a lease on a building and a business. People almost always employ and or train their kids and their wives. It's a family business. And there's always something to do. So again, forget it, Shea Richard. So what happened to Richard? So his death was attributed to a severe decline, and only about 4 to 5 years roughly after the book was published. So I don't really know if he had any time to really enjoy whatever his earnings would be. That's the thing. I really love this name. I have to use it. It's actually a proper 18th century sort of meme. It was an image that was in out of the journal years ago. People have been throwing it around on Instagram and Facebook lately, going viral. How I look versus how I feel. Can we relate? So this is that full picture of what Briggs likely would have looked like now. 40, 45, 47 when he dies from a severe decline, which Marc attributes to the fact that when you look at history and the way these cooks lived and worked, this is a beautiful kitchen. This is likely an image not of a basement kitchen because of the situation of the vault ceiling and such, but most of the kitchens, like I said, in the city are basement kitchens. They're very poorly ventilated. And in this period, we always think of people as throwing logs on the fire, but they didn't. They used, I've been on a steep learning curve as far as what they did in Europe and even in America. We don't think of them using coal. They existed using coal. And the coal fires are really toxic. There's not a lot of regulation on anything to do with coal fires. So likely when you get exposed over and over again, and I personally have experienced this being in these period distilleries and period kitchens and doing lots of different things. You can become consumptive really quickly. You don't get fresh air, exercise, and your health back. Over time builds up to the point where he had a form of poisoning, like a kitchen is full also of all sorts of things. They were not stupid people. They had systems. They knew how to take care of raw materials, raw foods. They knew how to store things, but you invariably always get contamination and illness. Such follows. Everything in an 18th century kitchen really hangs or gets stored in locked boxes. The main reason is that mice don't like things to swim. So all of the hooks and cranes and things that you see in the flitted bacon is often hanging either over your head or inside the actual flue of the fireplace, and then slowly gets like extra smoke and extra flavor. Keeps all the critters from crawling on it, keeps everything away. There's so much to manage, one can only imagine that Richard's probably pretty worn out at the time. So, what's the takeaway about 18th century food and taverns specifically? Well, just like we're getting back to today, a lot of people are more worried about sustainability, regionality, and things like that. So it's very much the farm table. Not because, they couldn't travel and they couldn't get food and they couldn't do this. That's bullshit. East India Trading Company is the Amazon of the 18th century. Make anything you want. Just like today, if you can afford something, buy it. It's available. There's a very, very established trade route from Asia, from everywhere. And so basically, they're still going to source the best things locally, produce the best they can locally. It's very similar to today. They're, first time in history, they're sort of ordering off a sort of menu. Most places like inns where you're traveling, you just go in and say, you just expect to be given whatever everyone else is eating. You're just making one or two things. So taverns are sort of start And French Revolution, post-revolution, same thing. There's all these cooks in Europe who are basically out of the job. There's a whole, when the French Revolution kicks off in the late 1700s, which is around the time this book is produced, you have a massive population of working people in France and that part of Europe who are displaced because the entire social structure collapses, utterly collapses. There's no households to work in for a huge part of society that are literally either left the country and fleeing for their lives, or been guilty. And it just made a huge effect throughout Europe. So there's tons of cooks looking for work. Briggs was what was called a fast cook, somewhat professional, and there's plain cooks. Plain cooks are usually like women who are good cooks who just need a job. Are you telling me to be cool? We're almost done anyway, but I'll take some questions if I have any. Feel great. Basically, French and English cooking is the same as today. We're all still obsessed with French cooking, and there's such a huge French influence because there's so many cooks in France. This is the era of the start of the restaurant. These cooks create businesses. They come to London. They create taverns, and for the first time anyone gets a menu. They literally, the displaced French cooks create the restaurant menu today. And Briggs was obviously very influenced by them. They also sort of start the trend where it's finished by you know it, and of course it's organic and sustainable. So I think this is our next to last, one of our last slides, where I basically decided to put one of Marc's quotes because it's very similar to when people ask me why I do what I do. So when I go somewhere and people ask me what I do, you can imagine sometimes people's heads spin and just like, well, I do what for a living. I'm sorry. Like multifaceted, I wear many hats. Sometimes I'm a cook, sometimes I'm a historian, sometimes I'm both, and then sometimes I'm a product designer. So Mark, some people ask me why do you work in food industry? I'd say well, food connects us to the past in a way that other things just can't. Food links wealth, data, trade, exploration, religion, and even prejudice. We all eat, so let's start our journey there. When I saw the book, Mark's book, I remember saying to him one day, I said, it sounds a lot like what I tell people, but mine doesn't sound as elegant. You're British, you do better. He said, well, what's yours? And I said, well, basically, food and clothing are the only things we can really recreate easily. Still not easy, there's a lot of work. Only things we can really recreate and experience right here, right now. To then transport us back in time, and buildings probably are the third, right? Come into an old building and it's very transportable. But then the next best thing is jumping in a DeLorean, but I can't go. He's like, yeah, I see what you mean. So I think he does a little more elegant, but it's really the reason we love doing what we do, because we get to create things and then we get to experience them, and there's no better way. So for more information about me, I've got cards over there. My website is fashionsrevisted.com. You can read about everything I do, and there's a link to my little shop if you want to help support me, help me eat. I appreciate it. Northern York Historical.org tell you all about the Historic Dill's Tavern, which is on your doorstep if you haven't already been. There's a brand new distillery. It's going to be operational soon. It's just been yesterday. It's gorgeous. And Sam McKinney, who built it, is saw everything from the ground up with this whole huge project. It's a really wonderful piece of work with, so you need to go there and see what they're doing. Of course, if you want the Tavern Cook book itself, up on Amazon. I haven't got any here for you. If you want to see something, I'd be honored. But yeah, I've got any copies to sign that I'd just be thrilled if you support Mark in his work, and invariably then what I'm able to do too. And on Amazon, just put in the Tavern